That was on me. Sorry about that. So, welcome everybody. This is Tichigan. Tichigan is a member of the Crowdsourced politics community. She is a member of our Facebook group, Crowdsourced Tribune, and has been with us for some time now. I think about a year and a half or so, or probably more than that, given the broader community that Crowdsourced Politics is part of. And she has graciously graced us with her presence here in order to help us learn a bit more about refugees, immigration services from a little bit of a legal perspective. So, Tichigan, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for this initiative to raise money for refugees. It's a great.
Glad to hear that. Glad to hear that. So why don't we get our audience to learn a little bit more about yourself? What brought you into your profession? What is your kind of passion that is in it? And just those sort of things. You can riff on what you want, and I'll ask you questions as they arise.
I'm an immigration. I've been for about 15 years. My practice is primarily focused on business immigration. I also do a lot of family immigration and consular processing. Sort of on the side, I have worked with refugees in the past. I have worked with asylees in the past. That of SIDGE, which is helping kids who find themselves here alone and would like to stay. And I really enjoy helping these communities out. I really think these vulnerable communities need a lot of help right now. There's a lot of upheaval going on in the world, and that happens to be something that I kind of keep on the side just because it's a little bit stressful working with these vulnerable populations, and I know that there are some other wonderful guests who focus on that more full-time.
Sure. So you said, did you say the Stitch is your work with kids that have found themselves here alone and would like to stay in the United States?
Right. So I haven't worked on those cases for a long time, but several years ago, yes, in 2014, there was a big crisis with a lot of unaccompanied minors coming to the border, and I think we're seeing a resurgence of that recently as well. And I remember at the time, the immigration judges were actually sending out, I belong to an immigration community in my city, and the immigration judges were desperate to have counsel to represent these children because, unlike indigent folks who are in the criminal justice system, immigrants are not entitled to counsel. So they need somebody who will help them. That's why your cause is so important. They need someone who will help them, and immigration lawyers aren't always able to donate their time because it's something that's a real luxury for a lot of people. So to have that funding is really important. So yes, these SIDGE cases were usually for unaccompanied minors, children who usually young teenagers or preteens who show up alone at the border and they need help.
And so this what you're talking about here in particular would have been the wave that happened under the Obama administration with the unaccompanied minors from Central America, correct?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
It was generally from the Northern Triangle countries for the most part, and partially related to a lot of crime there and gangs having taken over those countries, and they really were pretty lawless at that time, and they still are. It's actually getting worse at this point.
And just for the people that may not know, the Northern Triangle countries refers to which countries in particular?
El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and the other one, Honduras.
Honduras. Okay. And you say these countries were fairly lawless, and they still are. Is that to deal with drug trafficking, human trafficking, all of the above? Is it a situation of, in your mind, a situation of having a weak centralized government? What are the more pertinent factors that create this kind of situation?
I mean, there's so much that goes into it. They have such a deep history, such a sad and tragic history, and the United States definitely played a significant role in that. Destabilizing those governments with wars in the 70s and the 80s, and really getting involved, having to do with the Cold War. There were a lot of people that ended up in the United States as refugees at that time. Some of them ended up imprisoned, and they left the United States. They were deported, and they brought gangs that they had formed in U.S. prisons to Central America. Okay. Yeah, and so really the United States was an integral part of what happened and what is still happening there. But now there's a lot of gangs that have basically taken over the countries. Their corruption is absolutely rampant, and there are parts of the countries that are not really well controlled by the government at all. For example, Guatemala, I read an article a few years ago, I think it was in the New Yorker, that said that Guatemala, their murders have like I think it's a 97% unsolved rate, something like that. So their police forces really are ineffective. People aren't getting basic services. And then there's some other elements that are really making things worse. Climate change is making things worse. It's causing droughts in the area. It's causing flooding in other areas. And farming is down. People are suffering economically, and they're leaving. I mean, they're desperate to go somewhere with their families, and they bring their families. They send their children out. It's a little bit different than the patterns we see from Mexico, for example, where there's a lot of workers who come here to work in jobs that might be seasonal, and then they try to go back. They may send remittances home. It's a little bit of a different population.
Okay. And so the differences in the population, it makes a lot of sense given that there is a difference in the push factors that are causing immigration from the Northern Triangle areas. I think while you say that you deal a lot more directly with immigration and typical immigration issues, for me personally, and you can correct me if I'm wrong or if you see it in a different way here, is that I see this as being analogous to refugees, because you have a dysfunctional state that has a large population of people under threat from violence, either gangs or the government, depends on the situation, this country that you're talking about, and the people are trying to leave for their own safety. Whereas typically speaking, at least in colloquially we see anyways, is that people think of immigrants being economically driven rather than it being anything that's political or crime driven. Would you say that I'm wrong on this, or can you expand upon that at all?
Sure. I mean, I think that one problem that we have is that the definition of refugee is really restrictive. The definition of refugee, the concept as a concept in the law and the treaties were created after World War II, and it was a way, or during World War II, it was a way to protect all the people that were fleeing from Europe and find some sort of status for them. And so refugees, that's really grounded in persecution. So if there's not an element of persecution, either by the government, an agent of the government, or someone who the government isn't able or willing to stop, and then also on the basis of the person's identity, then it doesn't constitute a refugee or an asylee. And by the way, the difference, in case your viewers don't know, someone who's applying for asylum would generally be an individual applying at the border or applying from within the United States. But the refugees are populations. Those are pre-designated by the U.S. government, and the resettlement is an organized process that's assisted by the U.S. government, whereas for the asylees, they're really on their own. So, you know, there's a lot of people that kind of fall into this gray area where, you know, their people's experience doesn't follow these strict black and white rules. People could be suffering not just for economic reasons, but from what's going on in the country politically, or, you know, climate wise, or criminally. And it looks a lot like, you know, what refugees and what asylees would be suffering from, but maybe it doesn't meet all the legal elements, and
Gotcha.
it's really a legal definition. There's something else actually called the Convention Against Torture, and it's a little bit of it's like kind of like a fallback, and this is for people who actually may face torture or something similar if they were to go back to their home country, and it kind of fills in a little bit where somebody doesn't qualify for asylum because there's some strict requirements, such as that you need to apply for it within 1 year of entering the United States, or maybe somebody doesn't fit into one of those refugee populations, the program that's being run by the U.S. government. And maybe they can use Convention Against Torture to stop themselves from being deported, but it doesn't really help for them to get legal status like a green card. Whereas if you're a refugee or an asylee, you can do that.
Gotcha. That is a very important distinction. I'm glad that you're able to join us and give your expertise on that situation, because I had some inkling of it, but I didn't understand the nuances between those differences. So this is a good question. I guess it's a good follow-up question to that. When you say that the definition for refugee is too narrow, for you personally, how much would you expand that definition, and what types of people would you include in that definition of refugee in order to help them? And not just to help them, but to make it more along the lines of maybe what we see colloquially, or maybe more along the lines of what would be morally acceptable?
Well, that's a really good question, and that's something that's really debated by within the immigration community. And we actually had, I think, a really great example happen in the 90s. And it started with Janet Napolitano, and it was debated through, I think, 3 different presidential administrations, whether or not to allow women who are suffering as domestic violence victims to be included as a class. And of course, in some countries where it's a really strong patriarchy, and the police don't take a police report seriously. If a woman is, beaten to within an inch of her life by her husband or father, or in a domestic situation, and she can't report it, the government won't enforce it, the government won't protect her. So in that case, it does actually technically fit within the definition of refugee, but the issue was that the government didn't want to necessarily open the floodgates, because it would have ended up being, possibly millions of women from Central America, for example, applying for asylum, or, at least hundreds of thousands. And maybe they would have legitimate proof of this. So what they did was they kicked the ball down the road. They held the case in abeyance for years. And I remember when during the Obama administration, I believe, they decided that they were going to open up these cases and start approving some of these cases. Now, there's still a huge amount of variation between different immigration judges. Some of them have a really low approval rate. It could be less than 5%. And others, it's a little bit different. I believe that the Trump administration stopped approving these cases altogether, and I don't think that the Biden administration necessarily picked it up again. So I think it was a small window of time where those kinds of cases were being approved, and it's still very discretionary. It still completely depends upon which immigration judge you have, but those cases were important, and it's one of those really difficult problems to solve, and we have to ask ourselves as a country what role we want to play in helping people who are suffering, or is there something else we could do? I mean, if it's some economic problem, or if it's some crime problem or a gang problem, perhaps some of our soft power investing in helping to train law enforcement or military could help. But if the country is corrupt, that's not necessarily going to be such an easy thing to do. This takes diplomacy. It's complicated, and in the meantime, there's still going to be people running for our borders, and we have to ask ourselves, what do we want to do? From my perspective, we have to help people, and as a matter of fact, we our birth rate is going down. We should be,
right.
With open arms, inviting people in. People get vetted. If somebody has a criminal issue, they're not going to be, if they have a serious criminal issue, they're not going to be getting green cards. It's not, I think that that's a myth that a lot of people think that people will have some kind of, terrible criminal background and they're getting green cards. That's not the case. That's not the case. So these are people who have been fully vetted, who are getting green cards in the U.S. when it finally gets to that stage, when they start out as an asylee or a refugee, and we should be proud to have them. We're a nation of immigrants. We should be proud to open our arms to the new people coming.
For sure. I want to get some point of clarity here, because I'm not sure if many people know or what have you. When you say they are fully vetted before they get a green card, is that fully vetted from the country that they're coming from, or is that fully vetted while in the United States as an asylee? They haven't committed a crime within the United States and therefore they're eligible for a green card.
Well, it depends how they're applying, but
okay.
The record checks go across the board. So the U.S. has databases that link up to other countries. So
right.
just to give you like a kind of a broad perspective, when somebody is applying for a visa or any status at a consular post abroad, which isn't going to include asylees or refugees because the country isn't going to help out with that, they are fully vetted. They have to provide police records from every city they've lived in if they're applying for a green card at a consular post outside the United States. So those police records need to prove that they don't have any criminal issues or any criminal record. There are certain waivers available for certain minor, misdemeanor type things. But generally speaking, if somebody has a serious criminal record, they can't come here. There's no way to waive through that. And then if they're already here, or if they're applying as an asylee, there's a separate process that happens inside the United States. Biometrics are taken, and as you mentioned, there would be a link up to Interpol. Definitely the United States checks in with governments from other countries. They have contacts with the security services in these countries. And
they pretty much everywhere, right?
Oh, exactly. They do the full process.
Yeah, the United States, for people that might not know, the United States has helped train a lot of these security apparatus in other countries where refugees or asylum seekers might be coming from. And so our ability to massage those contacts, because we've established these contacts as kind of parallel to the governments themselves, might actually help in that regard as well. So I just wanted to point that out as well.
We always had I always like to pay attention to how those security checks go too, because from some countries they take a very long time, and other countries they're very fast, and sometimes it's surprising which countries are slow and which countries are fast. For example,
okay, I was going to ask.
I always had the fastest security approvals through Saudi Arabia. It would be like just a couple days, but then in Pakistan, notorious, it could take weeks, months, years. Yeah, so it was always really difficult for someone who was applying for a visa in Pakistan, but then even if they were a Pakistani applying somewhere else, they would often get stuck in security checks, and we would have to give a little bit of a warning to their employer, and this is coming from my business immigration practice. Gotcha. This could take a while, and it's possible it won't work in the end. And my gut tells me it's because Saudi Arabia really cooperated a lot with us after September 11th, and probably before. We had good communications with them. And Pakistan, what is it, the ISI? Is that
the ISI? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Pakistan. I'm not sure we always saw them as a partner. I think there was some stuff going on there that was not on the up and up after the Afghanistan war began, and at the borders, and maybe after all, where did they find Osama bin Laden?
Islamabad.
Yeah. So I don't think that was necessarily on accident that it was so difficult to get a security check through in Pakistan because maybe our government didn't trust them.
For sure. No, I can 100%. And I 100% understand that. I also would probably say that the incentives were different between the ISI and whatever the Saudi intelligence service is called, simply because Saudi government didn't want to get blamed for 9/11. So they're going to do everything they can to get away from that as much as possible. Let's see what else. So I want to get a little more about you and why you got involved in this kind of work. So divulge what you can or what you're comfortable with, obviously.
Sure.
So, but what was it that led you to become an immigration lawyer of sorts? And kind of how did you, what brought you to this point? Like, what was it that got you motivated?
So I've always been a person who really embraces everything international. Even
globalist
though
scum. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm not so in vogue anymore. So I grew up in the Midwest, grew up in not such a very international area. But I always enjoyed going to the big city and trying out new ethnic restaurants and such. And I learned how to cook Indian food. I taught myself when I was 14.
Oh, nice.
And I was always really into international travel. I studied Spanish in college. I was a Spanish double major. I did a study abroad. And ever since I did that study abroad, I really fell in love with traveling. And eventually that Spanish took me, I actually worked for Cartoon Network, broadcasting to Latin America, which was pretty interesting. So cool. I had a lot of, it was really fun. It was a wonderful place to work. I had a lot of Latin American colleagues who were here on visas, and we would get to talking sometimes about their situations. And I was pretty interested, and I had a lot of empathy for what they were going through, because when you're in a foreign country and you're trying to navigate the immigration process, it can get pretty complicated. So I always kind of had that in the back of my mind, like maybe I'd like to help with something like that. Okay. And then September 11th happened, and I found myself feeling, I had moved on from Cartoon Network at that point. I was doing marketing for a consulting firm, but I found myself a little bit untethered. I felt like I need to do something else that really means something. And I want to understand also, I think that was part of it too, was that I wanted to kind of understand what was going on, because with the Patriot Act and, the prosecution of terrorism and it was complicated. I didn't understand it. It seemed like there was a lot of, I kind of felt like some shady stuff going on behind the scenes, just in terms of defense contractors and the all of the bounty that they were reaping from these horrible things that were happening, and was the scope of our war on terror creeping.
For sure.
How does something like September 11th happen anyway? And the energy industry, and I just wanted to understand all of that stuff better. And I thought to myself, I'd like to go to law school. I'd like to understand these things better. And so I did, but I always kept in the back of my mind those colleagues that had trouble navigating the immigration process, and that maybe I wanted to help someone like that. And I did some really interesting work while I was in law school, working for a human rights organization.
Okay.
And their focus was on all different kinds of things, from female genital mutilation. I worked on a case like that. They talked about some extraordinary rendition cases. I didn't get too involved with those, but that was pretty deep stuff that was happening. A lot more, I think, around that time. I graduated in 2006.
Gotcha.
And so I was sort of adjacent to that. I was adjacent to the asylum case that I was telling you about with the women in domestic violence. And so I got my hands on a lot of different things, which was really interesting. I worked for a firm for a period of time, helping with deportation defense. Ultimately, I decided to do business immigration just because I wasn't able to compartmentalize like some other people could, and I think I would take work home with me. Yeah. So it was something, but it was something that I wanted to keep on the side, and so I have had an opportunity to dip back into it here and there, and it's very rewarding work, and I have so much respect for the people who do this kind of work day in and day out. I have heard so much about their secondary trauma over the past 5 years with the Trump administration, trying to help people at the border, families where they've been torn from their children have been torn from their arms, and just helping wherever they could, people traveling to the border and doing really hard work. And some of these families might have asylum claims. There are other ways that we can help them as well. And a lot of them don't actually have any immigration option for them to stay here in the U.S. So that's something else to keep in mind. But those who do, the people doing that work, definitely, my respect goes out to them.
Yeah, no, that's wow. You've lived a very interesting life, I have to say. It floors me every time I learn something new about somebody that's been in my community, or our community, I should say, or somebody that I've met online and just been able to talk to them a bit more, just how much life experience people just really have. And I am very humbled every time I hear somebody like you or somebody else discuss their life and how they've helped directly impact or made some things a bit better. Since your focus has been mainly on business immigration issues, I'm assuming you've dealt a lot with H1b visas, correct? Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah. So definitely H1b is kind of like our meat and potatoes. There's actually, people assume that if you have an employer here willing to hire you, that you're going to be able to get a visa. Not the case, not necessarily. So H1b is one. I mean, there's a few countries that have treaties with the United States that will provide some visas that are sort of like the H1b. So they're from those countries are really lucky, like NAFTA, Canada, and Mexico is a great example. And then others, available for multinational corporations or available for investors. But there's really a lot of different kinds of jobs that don't really have a great work visa available to them. So, we do what we can. And there's also, we also do green cards for people. So there's benefits that are available to a lot of people, though. So I'm definitely love my work.
And what would you say is the most rewarding part of your job?
I really, as a lawyer, I appreciate the opportunity to really connect with people and to feel like I've got that personal touch with them, that I'm helping them through a really important point of their life, and I'm helping them to engage in cultural exchange. Cultural exchange is an important value for me, and I like to see the celebration when people get their green card. I mean, they're so grateful to be here, to be a part of this country, and I think that's beautiful. I love my country, and I love it that other people can come here and love our country too. And there's been a lot of rhetoric, anti-immigrant rhetoric over the past several years in particular. It breaks my heart, because I think a lot of the time that rhetoric is coming from a very targeted perspective. People are using it as propaganda. And it's not genuine in a lot of cases, but it stokes people's fear of the unknown. And a lot of people do have a lot of fear around things that they don't understand, and you know, that their way of life will somehow be change forever, perhaps, because of different populations coming in. And you know, I actually do think when a country is considering its policies on immigration, that they should take into account what level of kind of acculturation can happen, and how they can kind of keep the beautiful qualities that our country already has, while at the same time adding to it. You know, the United States has been called the great melting pot,
Gotcha.
but I've heard other people also call it more like a salad or a stew, because you kind of maintain the individual elements of various ethnic practices. And you know, my family, a few generations back, was Scandinavian, and we still used to have for our Christmas dinner like the old Scandinavian lutefisk and some other interesting foods. I wouldn't say it's delicious, but you know, it's something that's been important, passed down through our family. And I think lots of families have things like this. And you know, at the same time, I'm American. We are Americans. We blend in with the rest of Americans with those unique values. And you know, I think that people that come here to join our country, they just want to do the same thing. They want to become Americans. They want to keep a little piece of the old country, but they also want to become part of what we are and what we have here.
Yeah, I think you and I share similar stances when it comes to, for lack of a better term, assimilation. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm wrong here when I describe myself, so you can say what you disagree with. But to me, what it matters is if the core cultural differences, or not core cultural differences, the core cultural values are maintained. Not so much, and this is again lack of a better term, window dressing, quote unquote window dressing. So, for example, when you said lutefisk, or how you pronounce that, right? That to me is quote unquote window dressing. It's not a core cultural value, but but things like, you know, respecting other people's religion, respecting other people's different world of views, respecting of general liberal values of egalitarianism and stuff like that. As long as people maintain or assimilate to those values, everything else is free game. And that's where I think the salad comes into play. Is that how you kind of look at this too?
Right. I mean, you know, I think that what's important when you come to the United States is that you're able to participate in a democracy. Or, you know, a constitutional republic, that you're not trying to change our system of government. And that actually comes up in immigration documents when people are applying for a green card. I mean, they don't want people who have that kind of values. They don't want Nazis. And I don't know how many are still alive, but they don't want people who participated in persecution. I mean, these kinds of values are fundamental, and you know, it's probably pretty rare, but actually, you know, there are groups around the world who do these things, and there's anybody who tries to fearmonger that we want to bring people like that into the U.S. That's absolutely wrong. That is absolutely never going to be a value of the United States. And personally, I'm pretty wary of fundamentalism in all of its forms.
Same.
I believe it's very dangerous. And you know, would I change the immigration laws to bar fundamentalism? Not necessarily, no, because we already have lots of fundamentalists here in the United States, including people who have run our government before. So I don't think they'd let that happen. And so if you're going to let one group of fundamentalists into the U.S., I suppose you have to let the others. But I do think that fundamentalism can be really dangerous. And I do also think that it's contrary to the core values of the United States.
100% agree with you, Tichigan. So if you had a magic wand, but you could only use it to fix one issue regards to immigration, refugee status, or whatever, what would you wave that magic wand to fix?
That's such a difficult question.
I know, that's why it's great.
You know, what frustrates me actually, and what I wish with all of my heart, is that we could embrace bipartisanship, something like we've had in decades passed, because so there have been, I would say, maybe every 10 to 20 years, over a couple different decades, there was comprehensive immigration reform.
Yeah.
And the comprehensive immigration reform would have multiple pieces. It would have an enforcement piece,
Mm-hmm.
and it would have benefits piece. And this is usually how we ended up having amnesties get passed. I mean, obviously the enforcement people didn't want the amnesty, but bipartisanship passed the bill. And what ended up happening when someone got amnesty? Well, we got to know who's in the country. We got everyone to pay their taxes. We got them status. People stopped exploiting them. And for a period of time, there was some order that didn't exist before. So there was a concern about, I don't know, us hitting 20 million undocumented immigrants or something.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that was the true number, because the estimates are really, really off. And probably a lot of people, I suspect a lot of people left during COVID. But yeah, but once you get up to a number like that, I mean, it's a problem for a lot of different reasons. I worry about undocumented immigrants being exploited. I worry about them being paid less than minimum wage. I worry about them being exploited worse than that. I mean, slavery even, and it does happen, or trafficking. So, you know, it's better for everyone if we can find out who's here, and that's usually part of a comprehensive immigration reform bill. But because there's bipartisanship is all but dead at this point, there is no negotiation. And the negotiations, when they're bipartisan in a lot of different issue areas, end up achieving really pragmatic results. Sure, there's pork barrel politics and, you know, a lot of inefficiencies. But I think that if we were to look at it, we would find that the country is still moving forward when bipartisanship is working. And it's not working right now. And it's really deeply upsetting to me, as somebody who considers myself patriotic, and I, you know, I love my country, that we can't work together anymore. And I think that would be the magic wand that I would wave.
So just to maybe throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in that, there's of course limits. So just what would your limit for bipartisanship be? Like what would be like your hard, like, no, this is something that we can't tolerate from one side or the other?
You mean, where would I stop negotiating? Where would I say,
sure, that's a better way to say it.
This is a hard no. Well, you know, I think that we're definitely, growing pain would be a very gentle way to say what's happening in the U.S. right now. Right. So with it's not really race, you know, it's somewhat race relations, but it's more like reckoning with the history of the United States and what has actually happened in terms of slavery and everything that's come out of that. And so I would not move back any of our progress with that. I would push forward no matter what. You know, I watched something, there was her name is Valerie Cower. I know she's a speaker and a thinker, and she's someone who's a spiritual leader, and she had this incredibly inspiring video that I watched probably over 20 times after Trump was elected, and she came up with this metaphor for our country and what we're going through right now is like going through childbirth. And what do you do when you're at the darkest hour? You breathe and you push, and you keep moving forward. And you know, that meant a lot to me. That I found that really inspiring, because you know, it hurts moving progress. It hurts, you know, it's hard, and it's hard work, and people run up against a brick wall when they're trying to move things forward. But you know, I believe in the end that that we have a very good chance of succeeding as a country. You know, sometimes I get discouraged and, you know, and down, but you know, I think that in the long run, democracy will win, but in the short run, we're probably going to have some growing pains. But yeah, my hard would be not to
Gotcha.
Lose any progress, and as far as race progress is concerned.
No, I think that's very reasonable. Well, Tichigan, you're more than welcome to stick around. Universal Discourse is going to be joining us here shortly, so if you want to ask Universal Discourse questions about immigration or what have you, you're more than welcome to stay on the call. But Universal Discourse, jump on in. I know you have access to the server, so if you want to jump on in here and get in on this conversation, on these interviews, please go ahead and do so. I think she's still around. Just talking.
I'll stick around for a bit, and I'll have to hop off. But I'd like to see what Universal Discourse has to say.
And then, do you have any questions for me, or like anything that you might want to know a little bit more about? Just since we're a little bit waiting here.
Yeah, I like to flip and be the interviewer sometimes.
Yeah, let's do it.
So what got you started on the issue of refugees in the first place?
So within this particular issue here, I am a 7-year Army veteran, and I actually did a year in Afghanistan. And so I felt that, we have a moral obligation to help those that either have helped us in our issues, and I should say not or, and when you break something, you have to fix it. And one of the ways that you can go about fixing the situation is that you contributed to the negativity is by, providing aid. And allowing refugees into the United States is one way to provide that aid. And so I felt like, hey, this is something that we can support, that we can do on our level. And I felt that it's just a decent way to go about it. Thank you everyone for watching. Be sure to check us out live on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share us with your friends. And as always, keep your head up through the political storm.